Welcome back to the Dershow. Since the last time we spoke, Queen Elizabeth II has died at an old age, and having lived a very long life, having served as the British monarch longer than anybody in history, and the monarchy goes back a lot of years. So that's quite a record, one that is unlikely to be beaten. She became queen at a very young age through an accident. Her uncle Edward abdicated. He was a virulent Nazi. He was he was married by one of the leaders of the Nazi Party to an American divorced woman, and the excuse for him leaving the throne was that he was marrying a divorced person. Of course, the current king married a divorced person as well. It was just an excuse. I think the reason he really abdicated is because he was a Nazi, and Britain was at war with Nazi Germany. Not quite, but they were on the way to war with Nazi Germany. And the idea of having a Hitler admirer as king of a country that was fighting for its life was obviously not acceptable. But as the result of his abdication, his brother became king, and as a result of his brother dying at a relatively young age, his eldest daughter, Elizabeth, became the queen back 71 years ago. And so she reigned for a long, long time with appropriate distinction. Not much is demanded of the queen. She doesn't participate in politics. She obviously accepts the new prime minister, says goodbye to the old prime minister, and travels to most parts of the world. By the way, she never went to Israel, and that's never been fully explained. But she went to many, many other parts of the world, and generally was a fairly admirable person. I mean, the absurd people who have wished her a painful death and who have made horrible, horrible statements about her should be condemned in the court of public opinion. I don't believe in the notion, do not speak ill of the dead. Certain dead people should be spoken ill of. The old joke about the Hitler goes to a fortune teller and says, I want to know when I'm going to die. And the fortune teller says, I can't tell you exactly when you're going to die, but I can tell you you're going to die on a Jewish holiday. And Hitler says, which holiday? And the fortune teller says, I don't know, but any day on which you die will be a Jewish holiday. So you can speak ill of Hitler, you can speak ill of Stalin, you can speak ill of Mussolini, but I don't think you should speak ill of the Queen. And so here are my reminiscences. I was a young assistant professor back in 1965 on my first trip to Europe. And 1965, for those of you who don't remember, was the 750th anniversary of the Magna Carta, 1215. And I was sent as a representative of Harvard Law School. I was an assistant professor, 7 years old, to go to Westminster and to represent the greatest law school in America, at least if you ask us, Harvard Law School. And I was given a seat of honor. I was just a few rows behind Queen Elizabeth, Prince Philip, and the current king. I don't remember whether any of the current king's Charles's brothers were there. For example, I don't remember whether Prince Andrew, who I eventually did meet, was there as well. I just didn't notice. Of course, we all noticed the Queen, and she spoke, and we noticed the successor, who is now the king. He was sitting there too. I was just a few rows behind them, and in the presence of the Queen and the princes in their place in Westminster Abbey. It was quite interesting. It was a thrill for me as a very young person. This was at a time I had never met a president of the United States or anybody of particular eminence, and here I was just a few rows behind. I'll never forget somebody I knew named Anthony Lewis, who was at the time the New York Times correspondent in England, came over to me afterward and said, "Where did you get to sit so close? I was 20 rows behind. I'm from the New York Times." I said, "I'm from Harvard Law School, so I get to sit close," because this was obviously a recognition of law, of the Magna Carta. Magna Carta is a great, great document of liberty, an imperfect document of liberty, as all of them were. It was mostly an appeal to the king by the royals, by the nobles. It was not obviously a democratic declaration, but it became a basis, not the basis, but a basis for a British common law. The Bible was as much of a basis. I taught a course at Harvard Law School called The Scriptural Sources of Justice, in which I traced many of our concepts of justice to the Bible, some of them to Roman law, some of them go back even further to the Code of Hammurabi and others. And but Magna Carta is among those that play an important role. 1215, that's a long, long time ago. And this was the 750th anniversary. It was quite a thrill to be there. So that's my encounter with the late Queen, and with the current king. Didn't meet him, didn't shake hands with them, listened to her speak, saw him shaking his head, and quite a thrill for a young kid from Brooklyn, who most of the important people I had met in those days were my, college and law school professors and a couple of distinguished rabbis here and there, but never royalty. So I met royalty. Not the last time. So flash forward now, 30 or so years. It's now in the middle of the 1990s, about 1998 or 9. I get invited by somebody who's now some kind of British royalty, Lady de Rothschild. She was not yet Lady de Rothschild. She was going out with the Lord Rothschild or Sir Rothschild, whatever his name was. And she decided to give a birthday party for the Lord Rothschild. And it was on Martha's Vineyard, and there was a big tent. And my wife and I were invited to this great party, and by Lynn Forrester, who was now the Lady Rothschild. And at the party was a friend of Evelyn Rothschild. Evelyn is a man's name in England, of Evelyn Rothschild, and the friend was Prince Andrew. And he seemed like a nice guy. People were calling him Andy. I'll never forget, I was talking to him. I was standing behind him and talking to him at one point, and the waiter spilled soup on his back. And I grabbed a towel to try to wipe the soup off his back, and I was grabbed by a guard and said, "One does not touch His Royal Highness." And so he sat there with soup on his back because I wasn't allowed to touch him. But we spoke, and we got to meet. And then as a result of that, he asked to come to my class at Harvard Law School. He wasn't particularly highly educated, but he had served in the British Navy, and he was seriously interested in academia. And so I invited him to come to my class at Harvard Law School. That day, we were dealing with the use of deadly force, and he was sitting in the back, and he raised his hand. And I called him, and I said, "Oh, okay, I'm now going to call on the Duke of York." And the students start singing, "Duke of York, Duke of York." I didn't even know the song, but so I think they all thought I was kidding, but there was the Duke of York, Prince Andrew, sitting in the back of the classroom, speaking with a thick British accent and making the points he was making about the rules of engagement in the Navy and how that affects deadly force. And then the dean of the Harvard Law School gave a lunch in his honor. And I sat next to him because I was the person who was responsible for him coming to Harvard Law School. And, he seemed like a perfectly reasonable man. I've never met him with Jeffrey Epstein or in connection to Jeffrey Epstein. Epstein, I think, was at that party on the Vineyard, and I think there may have been one other time when Epstein was entertaining academics and he was there, but I've never had any connection with the two of them together, and so I have no idea whether he is or isn't responsible for the allegations against him. I know that the same woman made allegations against me and made them up out of whole cloth, just made them up. I never met her, never saw, never heard of her. So I don't trust or give any credibility to any claim. And I can't figure out why Prince Andrew actually settled his case for lots and lots of money. Reports in the newspapers vary the amounts of money, but it's a lot of money. He could have won the case because the woman who accused him had many, many credibility problems, including about where she was a citizen. She was living in Australia at the time and claimed to be a citizen of Colorado. In any event, he pleaded. He didn't plead. He said he didn't do anything wrong, but he paid money, and settlements like that are often seen as implicit admissions. So I don't know why he settled the case. And as I said, I don't know whether he's guilty or innocent. He certainly suffered an enormous amount from that one photograph with him with his arm around this 17-and-a-half-year-old woman. On the day I was accused, I didn't even know about this photograph, but I publicly announced there would be no photographs of me with her because I never met her. And you can't make up a photograph. If there was a photograph, that would be the best proof in the world that it was a doctored photograph and made up. So I announced that there would be no photograph, there'd be no witnesses, there'd be no proof. I said I hoped that there were videotapes of every encounter in Jeffrey Epstein's house because that would obviously prove my innocence. Obviously, I wouldn't have said any of that had there been an inkling of doubt in my mind about my innocence or guilt, but because I knew I'd never met her. It took no courage or risk for me to predict there would never be a photograph, there would never be any evidence, there would never be a videotape, and there has been none, and there's been absolutely no evidence whatsoever. But there was this photograph of Prince Andrew, and that photograph damned him. If it's authentic, and I've seen no evidence either way, but if it's authentic, it certainly demonstrates that he was there with her and Ghislaine Maxwell in the same place at the same time. No such evidence exists with me. With other people, no evidence exists that she had any contact with George Mitchell, who she accuses of having sex with her, Leslie Wexner, who she accuses of having sex with her, Bill Richardson, who she accuses of having sex with her, one of the Pritzkers related to the current governor of Illinois, Jacques Cousteau's granddaughter, and other people, royalty, nobles, presidents of countries. I don't know how much of that she made up. I know that in relation to me, she has been just lying. So again, don't know what the situation is with her and with Prince Andrew. She claimed she was paid $15,000 to have sex with him when she was well above the age of consent. What does that make a person who was paid $15,000 to have sex with somebody when she was over the age of consent? There's also evidence that she trafficked a 14-year-old to Epstein for money. She was paid to traffic a 14-year-old to Epstein for money, and her lawyers have admitted that she was involved in such activities. So, this is not a woman who is above reproach in any way whatsoever. But, it ended up in Prince Andrew losing his status as a full member of the royal family. It's alleged, I don't know if this is true or false, that the Queen made him settle the case because it was just embarrassing, and there was the Jubilee and all of that. Whatever the reasons were, he did it, and he did settle the case. And he's unfortunately going to have to live with the consequences of his actions. If my case is successful, and if the jury believes that this woman lied about me, it will have an impact on him as well. But my concern is obviously with my reputation and my credibility, not with anyone else's. But I look forward to seeing what King Charles will do. A friend of mine, a professor at Harvard Law School, was one of his tutors at a young age, and came away very impressed with his intelligence and thoughtfulness. And everything I've seen of the new king suggests the same. I mean, he was essentially forcibly married to a beautiful young woman who he was not in love with. And as she said famously, the marriage, there were three of us in this marriage, Charles, her, and the woman that Charles always loved and is now married to, and will now be the queen consort. And he just strikes me as a man of integrity. Now, the question arises, and it's a fair question: what the heck is England doing having a monarchy? What is a monarchy? Why would any rational country have a monarchy? You pick your leader based on who they were born to in the order of birth. It's the total opposite of meritocracy. Of course, Britain has elements of meritocracy and democracy, of course, in its parliamentary elections. It's great democracy, and the king and queen are only symbolic. But why have a king or a queen? Many countries that had kings and queens gave them up. Others, where they still hang on, they hang on in a completely symbolic way without any real substance. But what about the symbol? The symbol doesn't seem right to me. Symbol of a monarchy is that rulership is hereditary. Obviously, again, that goes back to the Bible. And the theory, absurd as it is that God determines who the royal family is, and that the royal family has this responsibility bestowed on it by God. Look, in the Jewish Bible, the priesthood, whether you're a Kohen, a member of the priestly class, or a Levi, a Levite, who was the second class, was also determined by birth, by patriarchal birth. You're a Kohen if your father was a Kohen. My wife is a Kohen. Her name is Cohen, and that anybody whose name is Cohen or Kaplan or Katz, you can be pretty sure come from the Kohanic priestly group within Judaism. So, there's that too. But nobody takes seriously the argument that there's something special about being born as a Kohen, being born as a Levi. But it's pretty special if you're born as a prince. And now we are looking at who the next in line is, and King Charles's eldest son. And there are inklings of movements in England. There are people who are anti-monarchist, but for the most part, most Brits basically take the position, no harm, no foul. It increases tourism. Buckingham is a nice place. These guards with the big funny hats, people take pictures of them. There's no big deal. It only becomes a big deal when something goes wrong. When the king is a Nazi, that wasn't a good thing. Or when the prince is accused of improper conduct, that's not a good thing. So I suspect the monarchy will continue and survive. I also suspect that King Charles will be a stronger king in many ways than his mother. His mother, was very interested in animal rights and her corgis, and didn't do bad things. She presided over some very important events, presided in the most technical sense. King Charles was very interested in the environment. He's very interested in organic farming. He's interested in peace movements. He has a mind of his own, and I suspect his wife has a very strong mind of her own as well. And so, it'd be interesting to see how much that influences his monarchy. He's not a young man. He's in his mid 70s, and who knows how long he'll last if he has his mother's genes, maybe a very long time. Um, the queen is dead. Long live the king. I support that. So I'm only going to say good things about the royal family, though I'm not necessarily saying good things about royalty or monarchy or any of those things. And certainly, Great Britain has a mixed history of kings. If you don't believe me, just read Shakespeare. Some of his greatest plays were about the kings of England, some fictional, like King Lear, some historical, and Shakespeare elevated, as anything he touched elevates everything to a higher level. The brilliance of Shakespeare that people often neglect is his best characters are the villains, because he sees some good in almost every villain. I taught a course on Shakespeare and the law, so I know a little bit about it. And if you look at Macbeth, if you look at Iago, they're interesting, complex characters. If you look at, nobody knows who the real villain is of The Merchant of Venice, but the way it was portrayed back in Shakespeare's time, it would be Shylock who was the villain. What a if you prick us, do we not bleed? I mean, my God, that statement is so brilliant that I can't get over Shakespeare. Whoever he was, whenever he wrote, whatever he believed. Um, when I taught the course, there were people who said, well, he was a sexist. Of course he was. Everybody was a sexist in those days. He was a racist. Look at what he did with Othello. He was an anti-Semite. Look at Shylock. No, he was a person of his times. And I love reading Shakespeare. I love seeing it performed. I love listening to it read. And it has taught me more about English kings, I think, than reading histories of English kings. So good luck, King Charles. May you rest in peace, Queen Elizabeth II. And I hope your death was painless, and your memories endure forever in the minds of your children and descendants. And I hope it helps unite your family, and may Britain continue on its glorious path. And interested what you think of the monarchy, what you think of Queen Elizabeth. Send me some letters about it. So now let's turn to a few letters. The Declaration of Independence says the nature of God grants all people equal station to establish a sovereign government. And then it goes on and on and on, talk about the role of God in granting rights. Jefferson didn't really believe that. Jefferson, who wrote those words, was a deist. He believed in a God, essentially, who was the clockmaker, who set in motion the universe and then said, it's up to you guys. It's up to you guys. You make it work or don't make it work. He didn't really believe in an intervening God. In fact, he wrote a new Bible, the Jefferson Bible used today in the Unitarian Church, in which he takes out all the miracles, in which he writes about Jesus, the wonderful prophet and ethical leader, but not Jesus, the person who rises Lazarus from the dead, or who himself comes out of the tomb after a couple of days. Jefferson was not a believer. Neither was Washington. Neither was Adams. Adams once said that in our lifetime, most Americans will be buried as Unitarians. What's a Unitarian? Unitarian is somebody who believes in, at most, one God. At most, one God. You can be a Unitarian atheist. You can be a Unitarian deist. just like you can be any of those things in any other religions today. I'm just finishing an essay now on Israel's 75th anniversary, and the issue is Israel a Jewish state? Well, I don't believe it's a state that is religious. It's the nation state of the Jewish people, peoplehood, nationality, but not necessarily obedience to religion. The Declaration of Independence had to invoke God because it was a treasonous document. If the Americans had lost the Revolutionary War, as they came close to doing, not as a result of the Brits, but as a result of smallpox, if they had lost the Revolutionary War, Washington, Jefferson would have been hanged. Benjamin Franklin said, "We must hang together or we will surely all hang separately." So when you're writing a Declaration of Independence, you need to invoke God. You need to invoke natural law. Then when you establish yourself as a government and write a constitution, there's no God in the Constitution, not a word about God. It was called the Godless Constitution. It's all about structure, Article 1, Congress, Article 2, the presidency. It goes on and on and on. Even the Bill of Rights don't invoke God. It doesn't say Congress shall pass no law abridging God's. In fact, the only two references to religion in the Constitution is in the body of the Constitution, which says no religious test shall ever be required. Remember, in Britain, at about the same time, just a few years earlier, the British Parliament had passed what was called the Jew Law, which for the first time said you can serve in Parliament without accepting Jesus. So Jews were allowed to be in Parliament. You know how long that law lasted? About a year. And then popular opinion, the media went nuts. We can't give Jews the right to vote. That's ridiculous. So they withdrew it and they changed it. And they said, no, there's a religious test. Unless you're willing to take an oath to Jesus. And by the way, a Protestant oath, not a Catholic oath. You can't serve. You can't serve in the Parliament. What a radical change when the American Constitution said no religious test. And when George Washington wrote his famous letter to the Jewish congregation of Newport, where he says, "Of tolerance we will no longer speak, for in America, all you have to do is be a good citizen. Nobody will discriminate against you based on religion." Well, it wasn't quite true for the next 150 years or maybe longer, but at least the aspiration was there. So declarations of independence are always going to have God in them, particularly when they're revolutionary documents. The Constitution doesn't. So you can believe that your rights derive from God. You don't have to believe your rights derive from God. The Declaration of Independence doesn't make you become either a natural law advocate or a positive law advocate, because it also goes on to say we establish government to make these things, and then the Constitution talks about how to establish the government without God. Thank you, Professor Dershowitz, for a remarkable half hour. You are a Cicero of constitutional concepts. Well, that's nice. I like that. How brave of Alan Dershowitz to tell the truth. He knows what could happen to him, and his work ethics still compel him to tell the truth. Bless this man. Well, I certainly know what can happen to you. Dershowitz doesn't like Trump, but he likes fairness. He's not perfect, but he's an example to all of us. That's nice to hear. He votes for Trump, but he stands up for constitutional rights. Alan has honor and dignity. So, again, if you're going on YouTube, you're going to find positive things about me. If you go on Rumble, mostly not. I'm going to end with a question. I don't know who owns Newsmax, but I will know soon. Whoever you are, God bless you. Without a doubt, representing a majority of America, thank you for using common sense. Well, I'll tell you who owns Newsmax. It's a terrific man named Christopher Ruddy. Chris Ruddy is a friend of mine. I'm honored to be his friend. And he has developed Newsmax into a phenomenal force. Too conservative for my taste, but it's fair. It presents me as a legal expert. CNN wouldn't do that because I have to agree with everything CNN says. And I don't agree with everything Newsmax says. I fight often with Newsmax's folks who run their shows, their anchors, and they admire me for it. Newsmax today has one of the most diverse. I mean, it has, Greta Van Susteren, who is a centrist. It has Spicer, who's center with slight inclination toward right. So yeah, I agree. I agree. Bless Chris Ruddy. I think he's contributed an enormous amount to this country, and I'm honored to be part of the Newsmax family. And I'm always thrilled when they call on me for my expert opinion on the law. And I'm equally thrilled when they don't agree with it and they argue with me, and we move on from there. So thank you for listening to me, and come back tomorrow and write me letters. Good night.